After 25 years on New York sports radio, Joe Benigno is retiring. He will be missed. There is no voice I've heard more often for longer than Joe Benigno's, which is kind of bittersweet to admit and realize. But I think it's true. I have no favorite uncles. I had no pastor as a kid who's still around checking in on me. My parents more or less tapped out of my life when I was 18. Altogether, my life is mostly just me and the cast of characters that come and go in the various seasons of my life. But through all these seasons, there's the crackle of the radio playing in the background. Sports Radio 66, WFAN, New York. I have been listening to Joe Benigno for more than 20 years on hundreds and hundreds of ordinary days. And probably the few days I remember a little bit more, there's Joe Benigno in the background through breakups and being away for college and a kid in Queens and abiding under the glow of the Roku in a windowless room on Willoughby Avenue. There's Joe Benigno on WFAN. And if there's one thing I've learned in the last 20 years, it's how to get existential. Because I'm a Mets fan, and Mets fans are like Theoden from Lord of the Rings asking, how did it come to this?
Joe Benigno, Evan Roberts, 877-337-6666 is the phone number here at 1 o'clock CMB. The disgust, bro, is off the charts right now with the Mets. And it's just unbelievable. I mean, last night's New York baseball, the tale of two teams. And I asked myself over and over and over again, where did I go wrong? What made me in 1962 as, a 9-year-old kid who did not know anything about anything and anything, okay? What made me, after watching the 1961 Yankees, with Mantle and Maris, 61 homers, 54 home runs, all of that, world champion, beat up the Reds in the World Series, what made me at that point, okay, say, okay, here comes this team. There's going to be a new team now in New York. New team, okay? 1962, I'm 9. New team. I'm going to root for this team.
History may or may not repeat, but it definitely echoes. Ask Joe.
Team. Look, I'm a Met fan. I'm a Jet fan. I'm a Ranger fan. You're a Knick fan. How much have you been teased over really going back to the day they drafted Patrick Ewing with the number 1 pick in the lottery in 1985? How much in the last, now going on 33 years, have you been teased as a Knick fan? We'll start with Ewing. The consensus top player in college basketball, right? Guy that went to the finals 3 times in 4 years. Guy who won a national championship in 1984. Player of the year. The next Bill Russell. All of this. When I found out, because it was different back then in 1985, you didn't have all the immediate outlets that you have now to find out what's going on in the sports world. When I found out that day in May, it was May of 1985 that the Knicks had drafted Patrick Ewing, I was doing a dance when I could actually do dances, which I can't do anymore. But I mean, I was nuts. Oh my God! All the dreams of championships in my head. And I was like, oh, my God, they got Ewing. Oh, I was beside myself with happiness. Here come the titles. Well, that didn't work out. And how much pain did we have to endure as Knick fans in the Ewing years? The pain is there now, but the pain of the playoff losses, when you had a team that every year was a championship contender, I think that's worse.
It's easy to be existential when you've got 3 to 5 hours a day on the radio. There's a lot to reflect on. Radio may be a windowless room. If you ever get a chance to visit it yourself, don't ask why we're negative.
Joe, why are you guys always so negative?
Well, how can it? Hold on. Why are we so negative? You tell me why. No, you tell me. No, bro. Tell me why I should be positive. No, give me one freaking reason. No, bro. One reason why I should be positive. What is that reason? What is it?
Come on, there's hope.
There's no hope. There's no damn hope. They got inept ownership. They got a head coach who's brutal. We don't know if they have a franchise quarterback. We don't know what Joe Douglas is. They haven't sniffed the Super Bowl in 52 years. They haven't made the playoffs in 10 years. You can't. No, because I don't want to hear. I'm sick and freaking tired of guys like you telling me I'm negative. Well, what the hell am I supposed to be positive about? You tell me what the hell it is.
After 25 years of sports talk in New York, it really is all an echo. The Mets blowing big games is an echo. The Knicks' inability to have a winning season is an echo. Us wondering why we care so much is the ultimate echo. And Joe Benigno retiring after 25 years means all these echoes will continue. He just won't have a microphone to talk about him in. And that's hard. But I will never watch a sporting event in New York and not know what Joe's reaction is going to be. Because I've heard his take on all things sports for 2 decades. If sports is an echo, radio is the Grand Canyon. And it's circulating every rant and every scream and every cheer so loud that it resonates through the avenues of this city. The miracle is not that we're still watching sports after 25 years. Because watching games is just a reflex at this point. It's what we do. The miracle is that we're still bothered. The echoes bother me. History is echoing on the scoreboard, and I'm shocked, as if we haven't lived this script 1,000 times before. When Joe Benigno gets to his microphone at 10 a.m. every morning, we know what to expect. It's just history echoing with updates every 20 minutes. The most vital gift I've ever been given was a tiny 9-volt battery operated AM radio. A man named Joe Scroggins gave it to me. It changed everything. Joe Scroggins owned an apple orchard in Western Washington State, the state where I was born. My parents knew him tangentially through the years, and when we moved to New York, must have stayed connected with him, because after moving to New York around when I was 6, we went back when I was about 9 or 10. And he stopped to visit the Scrogginses in Wenatchee, Washington. Wenatchee is the most magical sounding town to a 9-year-old, making Scroggins a magical man himself. Before we returned east, Scroggins gave me this radio. And there was no reason for him to give me this. It wasn't my birthday, and do 60-year-old white men named Scroggins go around handing out radios to little kids? I don't know. I probably thought it was cool to get this little radio, but this was more than just a gadget from Circuit City. This was a life-defining gift. So much of my life can be traced back to that AM radio. The sports I like, the music I listen to, my shame for listening to so much right-wing radio when I was a kid, me doing this podcast right now is just one of the 1,000 ripples of Joe Scroggins giving me that little radio. Because radio is my longest and greatest love. Because talking into a microphone is 50 times more magical than Wenatchee ever was. I love radio. I am talking into this microphone because I was raised on New York radio. A 50,000 watt radio station is magic to me. And New York has like 10 of those. I went to college because I loved radio. I learned in some class that legally radio stations are permitted to broadcast at 50,000 watts. That's the limit. New York is the best because only the FCC can hold its wattage back. Radio will never die. This was a simpler time back in the 90s. This was when Sean Hannity was just an overeager guy on a radio station in Long Island who thought the president's love life was morally despicable. WABC 770 was Curtis Sliwa and Rod Kuby in the morning, Dr. Laura giving advice, and then the future titans, Rush and Sean, Rush and Shawning, as they do to this day. I could have been Candace Owens before Candace Owens if God didn't intervene and get me a CD player. At the very least, a boom box with an FM station. Thank you, God. I didn't have a clock in my room when I was a kid, so I could only know what time it was by flipping to 1010 wins, where they give all the news and traffic in 10-minute chunks at a time. 1010 wins is New York City in 10 minutes. I never listened to 880 CBS radio because 8 minutes isn't enough time to capture my city. I thug with 1010 wins. This being AM radio, there was no music stations, except there was a Christian station, I think 570. I didn't listen to that. I may or may not be wrong about this, but I think that station actually gave my father a free promo hour once or twice to promote his church. I probably didn't listen to that either, but that is a pretty random, fun radio fact. Anyway, this was AM radio, which did not have music, which is good because my mother would not have permitted such stations in my little room in South Jamaica, Queens. But the AM station had one. 1560 on the AM dial, Radio Disney. Radio Disney in 1999 wasn't as thoroughly Disney as the name suggests. This was before Hannah Montana and whatever the Cheetah Girls was and that whole thing. This was a different time. This was the era of that song about liking girls that wear Abercrombie and Fitch and I'm black, I wear green, I was dark. That time. You understand. Real music. Radio Disney was legit. They had the top 30 countdown every Sunday night, and I would weekly write down those songs in order to know what the most played songs on Radio Disney was. That's dedication. And after all those songs, what I loved most was a Swedish pop band who did covers of ABBA classics, the 18s. I love them. I don't think I knew what ABBA was back then, and I probably prefer ABBA now. But do I really? Because I knew then, as a middle child, angsty kid listening to sports radio, that Mamma Mia was a banger. And thanks to Joe Scroggins and Wenatchee, Washington, I love dance music to this day. But the one station to rule them all was the flagship station for sports talk in America, WFAN. The station was filled with broadcast legends. Don Imus in the morning, soon to be simulcast on MSNBC. Imus was AM Dial's Howard Stern, the king of dysfunctional morning drive. I owe it to myself to acknowledge how much Don Imus I've listened to in my life, and I just saw a used sweatshirt with Imus in the morning blazed in bold, and I'd love it. But I'm kind of a woke kid in Brooklyn now that's drinking too much cayenne kombucha, and I can't promote the ideas of an anti-vaxxer. But I did like the program. WFAN in the afternoons, Mike and the Mad Dog, Mike Francesa and Chris Russo. This partnership soundtrack New York's ascension to the top of the sports world. Chris Mad Dog Russo, he hated the Yankees, which means I hated the Yankees. My inner voice sounds like Chris Russo ranting about the Yankees when I'm watching YouTube Church or listening with disgust to white men with Bibles. I've got Chris Russo in my head. That's what my stomach sounds like. But for me, my favorite was The Voice doing overnights, 1 a.m. to 6:30 a.m., Joe Benigno. Because if you're ever up late at night listening to radio, you realize this business may be broadcasting at 50,000 watts, but it's really just you and the host. Because overnight sports radio is where fans discover radio is a community. Overnight radio is for the men and women working front desk apartment security or delivering papers or waiting for their shift to start at 7 a.m. You have to be up at 1 a.m. listening to AM radio if you don't have an option to sleep, which is why I was awake too. When I was in the 5th grade, my parents decided to stop homeschooling me and let me strike out on my own at Public School 176. The principal put me in the gifted class. We had to do all sort of these gifted things gifted kids do in New York City public schools because we were all so gifted. One of our weekly homework assignments was to make a weekly report from a physical copy of USA Today and cut out an article from each of the 4 main sections: news, sports, life, money, and write a summary of that article. Simple. This task really is somewhat creative, and I really do get what Miss Murnett was aiming for. Plus, we did get a free copy of the USA Today, which is cool. But I hated doing this, and I hated it for 2 reasons. Our family was poor. I didn't like anything that involved crafts and arts because I didn't really have like the scissors and the crayons and the bells and the whistles to make this really embellished and beautiful. And anything remotely crafty, I just didn't really have an anointing for. And the second reason is I really never could get the money articles, at least not enough to write about. Sports, crushed that. News, enough. Life, sure. But the money, I could never figure out. And I would spend hours and hours late at night flipping through the USA Today as a 5th grader, thinking, what am I going to do? But that doesn't mean I was awake alone, because I was awake with Joe Benigno. I was working on my bed under the glow of the light outside the street lamp on a quiet street, sorting through the USA Today, wishing I could just go back to the sports section where it was all so easy. It was a disaster. I was up all night flipping through articles about federal interest rates over and over, knowing I was probably just not going to do it and feeling the shame preemptively. But I was with Joe. And maybe I procrastinated because I should have been asleep and I wasn't. That's kind of cool. And I should have been asleep, but I was having fun because I was listening to this radio. I knew my parents weren't going to approve of it. And I loved the people who called in. I was listening to New Yorkers complain about trading David Wells to the Toronto Blue Jays, how Mike Piazza was going to be a bust. So many nights in the 5th grade listening to New Yorkers living ordinary lives in the overnight, and I may have been the youngest one. New York becomes the city that never sleeps when you're raised by faceless fanatics screaming at 50,000 watts. It's important to know, Joe Benigno was introduced to fans of WFAN by a different name, Joe from Saddle River, New Jersey. Sports radio and local markets work where hosts take callers. Joe from Saddle River could have been Joe from really any New York or New Jersey neighborhood. Joe just liked the Mets, and basically we all did the same. Just guys watching the games, pissed off about something, screaming after. So Joe's path to being the overnight host is a very mythical American story. He was just a regular caller, consistent. They liked him. There was a competition to give random callers a chance to host. He got his one opportunity. He got his one shot. He won. He got the gig. Like you heard, Joe Benigno sounds like the guy who is running the apartment lobby at 1 a.m. He talked about sports with questionable grammar and arguments that bordered on wishing there was just more feel to the game. There's a feel you get when you're a sports fan for 67 years, the data and the analytics that just won't give you. Joe Benigno had the feel of a sports fan with the voice of a truck driver. He's just so East Coast. I've listened to Joe Benigno all over the East Coast. Wherever I was, his voice followed. I listened to Joe Benigno when I was in college and the streaming radio was a thing. When the Mets had a brutal loss, I'd always make sure to listen to what Joe Benigno had to say. Brutal loss, brutal performance. Wherever I am in the world, I probably use the word brutal way more than the average person because that's Joe Benigno's word, and that makes it mine. Joe Benigno was on WFAN for 25 years and was always a fan that was recognizable in a way that makes radio feel like New York is still your city. He was one of us. I'm one of him. I can watch a Mets game in 2020 and probably guess how Joe Benigno is reacting to whatever fuckery is happening on the field because I feel the same way. Because there's a culture of Mets fans that's listened to WFAN for so long, we are all Joe from Saddle River. If there was no sports, I can't imagine ever spending time with the Joe Benignos of the city. And I'm smart enough to realize that I may not want to. When MAGA's newest congressional princess, Nicole Michalatakis, gets elected to represent the great people of Staten Island, I am not surprised. When I see Mets Facebook tweet basically some equivalent of All Lives Matter, I am not surprised because I have been listening to these people for the last 20 years. New York is not a bunch of subscribers to the Atlantic drinking kombucha. It's a city where everyone apparently has an uncle or an uncle-in-law who was a detective in the 60s with the last name of O'Neill. Every echo of New York radio isn't something I celebrate or co-sign. I'm glad I have a radio station with FM radio. I'm glad I have a bookshelf with 11 books on it. I'm glad that there's more than just WFAN in my life. But I'm never taking it out of the mix. Because New York is my home because I'm a sports fan in New York. My sense of abiding comes when I'm under the glow of the 50,000 watt radio station. And there is nothing that links me to this city and my neighbors and all of our communities together than wondering, why are we still Mets fans? So I have to fight to remind people that I'm a sports fan. And I do that because I have to fight to maintain my sense of what New York is like and who New York is for. There are whole parts of my fundamental understanding of this city that only make sense if you understand how sports are talked about here. When I'm a fifth grader and I have an extra dollar in Jamaica, Queens, and I go to the corner store and buy a 50-cent tropical fantasy, don't drink the tropical fantasy because they kill your sperm count because fifth graders in Jamaica, Queens talk about these kind of things. And then I buy 5 Swedish fish because Swedish fish were fairly priced in the late 90s and they were only a nickel a piece. And now I have an extra quarter. I'm going to buy a New York Post. And that's the best dollar I've ever spent in my life. That's the dollar of a kid who loves the Mets and loves sugar and doesn't know who the Koch brothers are. I'm going to fight for my right to be a sports fan because I'm going to fight for my right to abide in a New York that feels authentic to New Yorkers who do not care about kombucha. Nobody needs another podcast. Nobody needs another Starbucks. radio will never die because I've listened to too much Joe Benigno. And as long as I'm watching sports, I want sports to be played and coached with a little feel. I never want to read USA Today and nail the money section. I'm happy with the sports. And I don't want analytics ruining my sports team because that would be ruining Joe Benigno's. I'm fighting for my right to be a sports fan in New York City because sports fans in New York do not have anything to apologize for. When I got to my 20s, I really didn't know how to be friends with people if it didn't involve sports. I didn't know how, which is kind of insane. I have friendships now that have nothing to do with Kobe or hating the Yankees or how I made friends in basketball because we all knew how to shoot or whatever. Being a sports fan actually kind of embarrassed me, but it was something I had to tone down if I was to ascend in civilized, non-New York sports reality, because I didn't want people to think I was the overnight lobby attendant. I didn't want people thinking I was the random kid in the union trying to make minimum wage. I want people to think I am sitting on a stoop in Bed-Stuy with a 50-cent book in my back pocket that I bought on Strand on my way to the New Yorker Poets Cafe. I love these things. I'm more than just an AM radio I was given 20 years ago. But I can't minimize my 50,000 watt reality. Sports are the sounds when people are grieving and growing up and moving on. People go through shit. In this life, you will have suffering. We can wallow in a windowless room on Willoughby Avenue, or you can be a guy working the front desk of an apartment at 2 p.m. and not feel alone because you've got sports fans in every neighborhood of this city hating when Armando Benitez is blowing saves in the World Series just like you are. I've never had a conversation with someone and really connected with them because we both were subscribers to The Atlantic. There is no memory I can have with you because you buy your coffee from the place where I buy my bougie coffee. We share no history. We share no identity. None of the multitudes I contain that matter to me are things I can share with you if you're not a part of that history or don't understand why it's so vital to me. But the truth is, the best part of Joe Benigno isn't the existential elegance. It doesn't need to be poetry. It's really simple. After 67 years of trying and failing not to be heartbroken by the echoes of sports disappointments, we're still watching. And it's simple. The wisest thing Joe Benigno ever said on radio when asked why we tortured ourselves is, because I'm a fan, bro. That's it. I do this because I'm a fan, bro. I can make being sports eloquent, and you can look at many lenses of American life critically or anthropologically or the science of athletics, and they're all fine ways to plug into sport. But that's not the kind of fan I am. That's not the kind of fan we are. I'm a fan, bro. That's what we do. That's the joy. Every season I watch the Mets is a reason I have found reasons to love the Mets and baseball and radio. I want the Mets to always win, but I really still just like having them around. I will watch the Mets lose every game next season if I get to watch them lose listening to Gary, Keith, and Ron. I'll be pissed, but I'll like it because I like being me. I like belonging to faceless people I've never met with politics I probably won't support just because we will never forget those random summers where no-name players named Shane Spencer or Betty Agbayani showed up to their teams, hit a lot of home runs, and made a lot of headlines. I haven't listened to Joe Benigno's last episodes. It's recorded. I'll probably get to it, but it's hard. This is the voice that makes my life sound like my whole life. My sense of abiding with my life when I speak up about my life happens when I fully understand I'm probably mimicking Joe Benigno's accent when I do it. And Joe Benigno made a lot of my life really possible. So this feels like a real loss. I'm not crying, I'm not sad. But I am going to take this moment and just acknowledge that me being fully me is because Joe Benigno was fully himself for so much and so long. And that's awesome. All this to say, Joe, it's not easy. Enjoy retirement. I'm grateful to have heard you. You're one of the greats. You will be missed.
Again, let's go back to 1961 into 62. What was that 8-9-year-old idiot, okay, clown? What the hell was I thinking? Tell me right now. And then, that's in, I was 9 years old, so maybe you could defend it that I'm a 9-year-old kid. You know, what the hell do you know? But then at 12 years old, I became a Jet fan. What was the excuse then? I mean, that's even dumber than being a Met fan. Oh, my God.
Made some bad life choices.
Oh, my God.
I have an excuse. I was forced.
I'm telling you, the next life, I don't want to know anything about sports. Nothing. Golf. That's it. Only golf.
That's awesome.